Hi, I'm Danielle.
Hi, I'm Cole.
And we are the student leaders of the High Stakes Movement, where our goal is to remove all the beef items from the Atlanta Public Schools lunch line and replace them with plant-based options.
Our primary reasons for doing so are to save both the environment as well as human health, but also for economic and cruelty reasons. When we get this done, we will be the only public school systems in the United States that have beef removed from their menus. Thank you for watching our video.
Heat waves are getting stronger, floods are growing larger, wildfires are obliterating more of America's landscape. It's because of climate change that's largely man-made.
Most climate scientists think we're already beginning to see the extreme consequences of a warming world. Severe storms, sea level rise and flooding in the Philippines and on the U.S. East Coast. Other consequences, crop failure and mass population movement, may also reach crisis levels in the next 20 years or so. All this will happen sooner than previously feared by the year 2030, the report says, if greenhouse gas emissions continue at current rates and global temperatures rise 2.7 degrees above what they were in pre-industrial times. In fact, we're already 2/3 of the way there.
If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
Bushfires, more than 25 million acres have burned. That's since September. And that's an area larger than the entire state of Indiana.
We are witnessing right now, in the form of these unprecedented bushfires in Australia, is the impact of human-caused climate change.
Even more devastating toll on the country's wildlife. It's estimated more than 1 billion animals have been killed.
According to a 2018 UN report, we need to cut our emissions by 45% by the year 2030 to prevent irreversible catastrophe. Meanwhile, our global emissions are still rising.
Right now, we're on the edge of 3 major tipping points. The first one is the Arctic ice cap. That ice cap's like a mirror. It reflects the sun's light off of the Earth and keeps it from warming us up. But as it melts, you get a smaller mirror, which means a warmer Earth, which means more melting, which means more climate change. Another example of a tipping point is ocean acidification. As you get more CO2 in the atmosphere, a lot of it actually is going into our oceans. And a lot of stuff, like plankton, can't live in that kind of acidified water. And plankton is the basis of the food chain. If the plankton die, we lose the whole ocean ecosystem. Another example is Arctic methane. We've got a gigantic amount of methane gas frozen into the tundra. And it is 50 times as toxic as CO2 is. It's CO2 on steroids. As it warms, and that methane gets released, it then causes global warming to get worse, which means it warms more, which means more methane released, which means worse warming, and all of that process spins out of control.
Due to extreme wildfires, significantly more Arctic methane was released this summer. Wildfires are more frequent and destructive in hotter temperatures. As they get worse with climate change, the methane thaw will accelerate faster than initially predicted. In September 2019, the UN reported that we have already surpassed certain tipping points in our oceans, the effects of which can no longer be avoided.
Until now, much of the Earth's warming has been absorbed in its oceans. But according to this latest UN report, tipping points are being reached where some of the more severe consequences of climate change can no longer be avoided. Melting ice in Greenland and Antarctica and from mountain glaciers is continuing at accelerating rates, and the resulting sea level rise around the world already threatens coastal populations.
Climate change is self-reinforcing. This is why the longer we wait to act, the worse our chances become.
It's not about a few more droughts and a few more storms. It's about a catastrophic shift in this fragile balance of our biosphere that threatens everything we love.
The U.S. government report estimates that if nothing changes, we could be at 4 degrees Celsius by 2100 with no ability to stop the continued warming.
At that point, the majority of the world's coral reefs will be wiped out. Arctic summer ice will be critically reduced, exposing the sea to hotter temperatures, while polar region ice sheets will continue to melt, drastically raising sea levels and forcing millions from their homes. And much of the Amazon, the world's largest forest and CO2 absorber, would die off from drought.
At this rate, by 6 degrees Celsius, our rapid global temperature spike will mimic that of the Permian mass extinction, when 95% of all life on Earth was lost. Climate change has been called the greatest threat to our civilization in history.
So why does the beef matter?
Cows produce high amounts of methane from digestion and manure. Methane has a global warming potential 86 times that of CO2.
Made to a report online published by the United Nations stating that cows produce more greenhouse gases than the entire transportation sector. This means that raising cattle produces more greenhouse gases than all cars, trucks, trains, boats, planes combined. But not only that, I found out raising animals for food consumes a third of all the planet's fresh water, occupies up to 45% of the Earth's land, is responsible for up to 91% of Amazon destruction, is a leading cause of species extinction, ocean dead zones, and habitat destruction.
We cannot stop climate change if we don't reduce our beef consumption. It's not only necessary, it would also be extremely effective in the fight for the planet.
If you reduce the amount of methane emissions, the level in the atmosphere goes down fairly quickly, and within decades, as opposed to CO2. If you reduce the emissions to the atmosphere, you don't really see a signal in the atmosphere for 100 years or so.
National Geographic reports that improperly raising cattle has caused much of our grassland and soil loss. Beef production is also the leading cause of deforestation.
Our global rainforests are essentially the planet's lungs. They breathe in CO2 and exhale oxygen. An acre of rainforest is cleared every second, and the leading cause is to graze animals and grow their feed crops. That is essentially an entire football field cleared every single second. And it is estimated that every day, close to 100 plant, animal, and insect species are lost due to rainforest destruction.
At this moment, the Amazon is being decimated by a record number of wildfires.
The Amazon rainforest, often called the planet's lungs, is struggling to breathe. Record fires causing massive devastation, nearly 73,000 detected by researchers so far this year, an 83% increase from 2018. The fires visible even from space, those white patches not clouds but smoke, powerful winds carrying it nearly 1,700 miles away to Sao Paulo. The major concern, how the wildfires could accelerate climate change.
Cattle ranchers and farmers are setting these fires intentionally to clear the land illegally. Drought and wind conditions are accelerating the disastrous spread. According to a recent UN report, our rampant misuse of the land will threaten our future food supply.
The report finds that about 3/4 of the Earth's ice-free surface has been paved, plowed, or deforested. Great for economies, horrible for nature's cycles. And with all the diesel and fertilizer used to grow the modern meal, they say agriculture is to blame for nearly 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions.
These next 10 years will be critical in the fight against global warming. But climate change isn't the only crisis we're facing. Our freshwater sources are drying up. This is primarily due to extreme drought, heat waves, and overusage.
The shortage of water.
By 2050, the United Nations says more than 5 billion people could be facing water shortages across the globe.
Normal is gone because populations around the world have grown so large. Normal is gone because humans are now changing the climate, and we're in a completely new set of conditions and environments and extreme events.
Raising animals for food accounts for 1/3 of water usage worldwide.
That 1/4 pound hamburger requires over 660 gallons of water to produce. Here I've been taking these short showers trying to save water, and to find out just eating one hamburger is the equivalent of showering 2 entire months. So much attention is given to lowering our home water use, yet domestic water use is only 5% of what is consumed in the US versus 55% for animal agriculture. That's because it takes upwards of 2,500 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of beef.
It takes over 400 gallons of water to produce just one lunch line burger. Is it really worth it? Biodiversity is also under attack.
In May of 2019, the UN reported that our planet's ecosystems are in a state of collapse due to species extinction.
The Earth is now in its worst shape in human history. That is according to a new United Nations report. It finds up to 1 million species of plants and animals face extinction, many within decades. Researchers cite climate change and human behavior as major contributors. Scientists say we can do small things in daily life to help combat the problem.
We have to think that this is the only world that we know that supports life, and we really have to take better care of our life support system. So many of the other services are absolutely necessary just for our own survival. It's not just food, it's the oxygen we breathe. If you alter the food chain from the top predators to the fish that are below it to the zooplankton, which are these tiny creatures from which the fish feed, we will get an imbalance, and even the level of oxygen in our atmosphere will actually change because of those. It's a cascade effect.
Between habitat destruction, contaminants, and its role in global warming, animal agriculture is the leading cause of worldwide species extinction. On this path, extreme weather and a shortage of viable ecosystems will devastate food crop production within decades. It's already happening in the Midwest.
Look at the mounting toll taken by the ongoing flooding across the Midwestern United States. Thousands of homes are damaged and vast swaths of farmland underwater.
Billions of dollars worth of crops, livestock, farm structures, and food stores have been lost.
Estimate about $400 million in cow-calf losses, about $440 million in crop loss. We've had over 2,000 homes, over 300.
American family farms are in crisis. Years of extreme weather and trade uncertainties have driven many to bankruptcy.
All their bulls and several cows and calves. A heartbreaking loss for a family who cares so deeply for their animals and the land they love.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Fishermen are also being affected. The fertilizer runoff from the flooded farms created an expansive dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico this year. The use of fertilizer allows for overgrazing and continuous planting of high-demand crops like corn and soy without rotation. The bulk of those crops go to feeding livestock. At the same time, warming ocean temperatures are destroying critical coral reefs all over the world. These and other damages being done to the ocean, coupled with overfishing, will cause sea life to plummet in the upcoming decades. Such food and water shortages would lead to unprecedented refugee migration.
So on our watch, we are facing the next major extinction of species on the Earth that we haven't seen since the time of the dinosaurs disappearing. You know, when whole countries go underwater because of sea level rise, when whole countries find that there's so much drought that they can't feed their population, and as a result they need to desperately migrate to another country or invade another country. I mean, we're going to have climate wars in the future.
If we don't make big changes by the year 2030, our planet's fate could be out of our hands, leaving us with the possibility of global extinction within the next 100 years. We can make a big difference now by cutting the factory farm beef from the lunch line.
What would happen if we didn't kill all these cows and eat them? Then we wouldn't have to breed all these cows, because if we didn't have to feed them, then we wouldn't have to devote all this land to growing grains and legumes and so forth to feed to them. And so then the forest could come back, wildlife could come back, the oceans would come back, the rivers would run clean again, the air would come back.
%70 of the beef produced in the U.S. comes from a CAFO, or a concentrated animal feeding operation. This is where we get our burgers from now.
This type of livestock production is one of the most resource-intensive practices on the planet. It's been made possible through massive taxpayer subsidies, but the true cost is enormous. Drought, desertification, carbon emissions, dead zones, disease.
In this method, year-old animals are moved to feedlots to be fattened on corn, soy, and growth hormones before processing.
The demand for corn and soy for feed has farmers using fertilizers and steady irrigation to maximize output.
This is considered the only way to supply the growing market for beef. Government subsidies keep the prices low, which further fuels demand. Overcrowding causes disease, so cows are given preventative antibiotics. These medications could be putting our own health at risk. Responsibly raising cattle on grass alone has been shown to achieve a much lower eco-footprint and is healthier for humans and animals. Better still, there's a growing movement of farmers who are using new techniques to revitalize damaged ecosystems.
With regenerative grazing, we mimic what the bison once did by building appropriately sized paddocks each day that allow us to graze hundreds of cattle across each paddock. Once the cattle have eaten some of the grass, trampled some, and fertilized the area, they are immediately moved to the next paddock and then the next. This practice produces profound results that prevent overgrazing and promote tremendous fertility and growth. If we focus first and foremost on the soil and restoring that soil function and biology, then everything else comes much easier.
And soil organic matter is actually 50% carbon, which means if we're regenerating and rebuilding soil, we're actually putting carbon into the ground. Now, I've been told and we've read in books that it takes hundreds to thousands of years to build back soil. How quick are you doing it here?
We're able to build new soil organic matter at the rate of 0.5% to 1% annually.
Put some perspective on this. A 0.4% increase of soil organic matter on the world's agricultural soils would completely negate all current CO2 emissions. Alan is increasing his soil organic matter by 0.5% or 1% every year.
If we add just 1 more percent soil organic matter, that means that every single acre can hold another 25,000 gallons of water. Ready? And we know how profound this impact is, not just on the farmers and ranchers themselves and their quality of life and their ability to make a good living, but also on the rural economies surrounding these farms and ranches. We can rebuild our ecosystem, our degraded soils and our degraded water cycles. That's what excites me. And
Regenerative farming and grazing has the power to do more good for grasslands, soil, wildlife, water supply, and carbon capturing than many other green initiatives. If and when you eat beef, sustainable grass-fed is the best choice for your body and the planet. But right now, grass-fed only represents 3% of U.S. beef production. Industrial market dominance prevents faster growth. We must also understand that grass-fed simply can't fulfill our eating habits.
Currently, nearly half of all United States land is already dedicated to animal agriculture. If we were to switch over to grass-fed beef, it would require clearing every square inch of the United States, up into Canada, all of Central America, and well into South America. And this is just to feed the United States demand on meat. But that figure doesn't even take into consideration that much of that land isn't suited to graze livestock. We would have to convert all mountain ranges to grassland, clear ancient forests and national parks to grazing, and demolish every city just to make room to graze cows.
There just isn't enough earth to support how much beef we eat. Removing it from the lunch line is an easy way to cut back. The environment isn't the only thing suffering from how much meat we eat. We are too. Americans eat 6.5 times more red meat than they should. Overconsumption has become a leading contributor to sickness and death.
Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, it's like a tsunami.
A new study indicates eating red meat, whether it's processed or not, can increase your risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
The cause of diabetes is a diet that builds up the amount of fat into the blood. I'm talking about a typical meat-based, animal-based diet. You can look into the muscle cells of the human body and you find that they're building up tiny particles of fat that's causing insulin resistance. What that means is the sugar that is naturally from the foods that you're eating can't get into the cells where it belongs. It builds up in the blood, and that's diabetes.
I had them through, looked at what they were dying from, and they found a definite correlation between eating red meat, particularly eating processed meat, and death rates from all types of cancer. They didn't specify which types of cancer, but cancer and heart disease.
1/3 of all deaths in the U.S. are from heart disease or stroke. 1/6 of Americans die from cancer. Over 90 million people suffer from obesity. Over 30 million people have type 2 diabetes.
If you ate a diet that was calorically adequate and even things like brown rice and broccoli, and you got enough of it, you'd get enough both quantity and quality of protein. 2,000 calories of brown rice and broccoli is going to be about 80 grams of protein a day, including the essential amino acids that you need in order to maintain optimum health.
I mean, grains are loaded with protein. Beans are loaded with protein. Vegetables are loaded with protein.
The funny thing about protein is most Americans get about twice the amount they need. Most Americans get less than half the amount of fiber they need. But the conversation tends to always be about protein, so
Only 10% of Americans are eating enough vegetables, even fewer in low-income communities.
An exploding movement of elite athletes are utilizing vegan diets to heal injuries, speed recovery times, and enhance their performance.
Before I was vegan, I was only bench pressing 315 like 5 times. Then, after going vegan, I was doing 400, 425, 465.
My life has been improved by adopting this lifestyle. I feel better, I perform better athletically, I sleep better, my energy with my kids is better, my focus at work is better, everything's better.
Yeah, just powers it in. It was a huge night for the Titans. They upset the Ravens 28-12 to move on to the AFC Championship.
Switched to a plant-based diet. I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
And sore. This was our best season in the last 15 years, and we had 14 guys on plant-based diets.
We all want to feel great, have more energy.
In sports nutrition is that we have to have animal protein to perform at a high level. That's just not true.
My grandchildren can't keep up with me.
It's not one set of dietary guidelines for improving your performance as an athlete, another one for reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes. It's the same for all of them.
Someone asked me, how could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? And my answer was, have you ever seen an ox eating meat?
Protein and iron are critical to maintaining optimum health. The lunch line can get you those vitamins through delicious plant-based meals. This dietary shift would give you more energy, less inflammation, better focus, and higher blood flow to working muscles. We don't need more beef, we need more vegetables. In 2018, healthcare expenses in the U.S. reached $3.7 trillion. The U.S. government paid $1.1 trillion of that. or 28% of the budget. 75% goes to treating chronic diseases, primarily heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and obesity. Overconsumption of red and processed meats are leading causes of them all.
Climate change. It's not just threatening to devastate the environment, it is also set to have a brutal impact on the U.S. economy. Warns of expanded wildfires in California and the Southeast, crop failures in the Midwest, disrupted global supply chains, and distressed infrastructure. All of these would set the U.S. economy back decades. I want to go through the
8 million homes are without power, and in New York City, the wounds are particularly severe. In the borough of Queens, between 80 to 100 homes caught fire last night and were destroyed. Public transportation, meantime, continues to be closed after
over 1 million people were displaced, and this drought was part of a trend. According to a study by the U.S. government's National Gym to dry out, resulting in longer, more severe droughts. The places in red are getting the worst of it, and Syria is right at the epicenter.
We are crippling our budget and have fallen into a massive national debt. It's the students who will have to pay it off. The national debt is $23 trillion. Last year's interest on it was $325 billion. Healthcare plus disasters plus interest equals $1.7 trillion, or 39% of the budget, and they are all going to grow. The amount spent on education was $108 billion, only 3% of the budget. There are bigger expenses yet to come. For example, New York will be one of the first cities flooded by rising waters. Plans for a $10 billion seawall are underway.
Currently, there is a plan to build a wall around the lower half of Manhattan. It's called the Big U. It's a berm about 10 feet high. That would protect us from storm surge similar to something like Hurricane Sandy, but just in Manhattan. But that wouldn't protect people right here in Dumbo. However, if the seas just rise by 5 to 9 meters, you're going to have to put a wall around the entire city. But even if we were to do that for New York City, could we do that for the entire East Coast?
It is projected to cost $400 billion to protect at-risk coastal cities with storm walls. Many cities will not receive federal funding. And when people abandon the coastline, it could cause urban overcrowding, a strain on public services, and further deforestation for housing and development. Cities like Atlanta would be most affected by this inland migration to escape sea level rise. While paying for the effects of extreme weather and rising seas, we must also invest in solutions to prevent further warming.
Renewable energy infrastructure, such as building solar and wind generators all over our country to reduce climate change, I mean, that's a pretty good idea, but it's projected to take at least 20 years and at least minimally $18 trillion to develop. So another solution to climate change, we could stop eating animals. And it could be done today. It doesn't have to take 20 years, and it certainly doesn't have to take $18 trillion because it costs nothing.
In efforts to combat mounting national debt, a substantial cut to food stamps and free lunch for students has been proposed.
It would be a $17.2 billion program in 2019. They would slash $213.5 billion. They would add work requirements. They would limit eligibility. They would end a nutrition education program. And then
1.6 million Georgians depend on food stamps. 71% of them are families with children.
The overconsumption of beef is a major contributor to the growing cost of climate change, the growing cost of food, the growing cost of healthcare, and the growing cost of interest. To offset these expenses, we will likely see more cuts to public services such as food aid and education.
This issue affects us all.
Almost 10 billion farm animals raised and killed for food every year in horrific conditions. This is institutionalized torture.
Most cattle raised for beef endure several mutilations without painkillers. Most spend the last few months of their lives in overcrowded feedlots, standing in their own waste. Unreliable, stunning practices at the slaughterhouse condemn many cattle to having their throats cut and their limbs hacked off while still alive and conscious.
One step forward, one step backward. That is all the freedom of movement they have.
The treatment of livestock in factory farms is the worst case of animal cruelty in human history. It's time to do something. If we cut the beef served on our lunch line, we could save 132 million gallons of water, or 46 barrels per APS student, and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 6.7 million pounds each year. This equates to 3.7 million miles driven. Or having all the students from North Atlanta and Washington walk to and from school for the whole year. We'd save thousands of acres of land usage and reduce our risk of cancer, stroke, heart disease, and diabetes. We'd drastically reduce our contribution to ocean pollution and species extinction. We'd also fight malnutrition, end our support of industrial beef, and help pave the way for more regenerative family farms. Our future depends on them.
Right now, students across the globe are protesting for climate action. They were inspired by a 15-year-old activist.
We often talk about these negative tipping points, things that we can't change. There could be also positive tipping points, like when people decide they have had enough.
To lead what could be the biggest day of protest yet.
Strikes she's inspired in the U.S. and across the world.
People are striking today in over 150 countries.
The tipping point we are waiting for right now is that people will realize what power we actually have.
We need to join the fight. There are 74 million students nationwide. Atlanta can be at the start of a big change. Sign our petition and vote against beef in the upcoming student surveys. Because we deserve better.
Hey, my name is Angelo Ramirez. I'm a senior at North Atlanta High School. I've played varsity baseball for the past 3 years, and I encourage all of y'all to get behind the high stakes movement as it will improve the environment and the health of our students. Follow us on Instagram at High Stakes Movement to get updates and learn more about our movement.
Hi, my name is Emily Dacchiardi, and I'm North Atlanta Student Government President, and I support the High Stakes Movement.